Welcome to 1202, the Human Factors Podcast. The podcast that covers all things about humans, technology, and particularly the bit in between.
Welcome to 1202, the Human Factors Podcast. The podcast that covers all things about humans, technology, and particularly the bit in between. With your host, Barry Kirby.
And welcome to this episode of 1202, the Human Factors Podcast with me, yes, Barry Kirby. I don't know about you at the moment, but as we go through COVID and the whole working from home and everything like that, I spend quite a lot of time feeling tired. And how to balance my day with the with working and home life and everything, nothing seems to have been gone into its old routine. So one of the things I've been really interested in is the impact of fatigue in projects, in using and dealing with equipment. And so I'm really delighted to be able to be joined today by Sarah Booth, who's going to talk to us today about fatigue risk management. So welcome, Sarah.
Hi, Barry. Thanks for having me.
No problem. So as we said, we're going to be talking about fatigue risk management, and you are a senior manager within Baines Simmons looking at fatigue risk management. What does it actually mean?
Oh, that's a good question. So fatigue risk management as a whole is basically, as you just said, it is making sure that people aren't too tired to do the job that they need to do safely. So what we do as a group of consultants within Baines Simmons is we work with primarily safety critical organisations. So that might be airlines, it might be oil and gas, it might be road transport. The list is pretty endless, to help make sure that their people are sleeping at times of day they should be sleeping, awake at times of day they should be awake, and scheduled to really support that and the fact that they are well awake when they should be basically. So yeah, sounds simple, but there's a bit of work involved behind the scenes. I
was going to say, we need to dig into this quite a lot, I think. But before we get into that, let's learn a bit more about you. So fatigue risk management is quite niche. How did you get there?
Oh yeah, so niche. May or may not believe me, it was an accident. So,
no, to be honest with you, with human factors as a whole, I absolutely believe you. We all seem to have fallen into these things by accident one way or another.
Yeah, you just come across them. So I did a master's degree in space physiology and health. About 10 years ago now, at King's College London, and one of the lectures, which I still remember, that was done by Barbara Stone and Karen Robertson, who were both at Kinetic at the time, was all about sleep and fatigue. And at the time, it was just one lecture of many. You get to the end of the year and do your exams, all that stuff, and then looking for a job, the job that I guess I'm still at the same place, came up, graduate entry-level position, fatigue risk management, and I thought, oh, hang on a minute, that was mentioned 6 months ago in a lecture. Yeah. And yeah, one thing led to another, graduate entry-level position, and 8 years later, I'm now senior manager of what was Clockwork Research. We're now Baines Simmons, because we were acquired by the group of companies about 4 years ago now.
Oh, fantastic. So really, you really got something off hearing somebody talk passionately about what they do on a day-to-day basis, and were just basically inspired.
Yeah, basically. And I mean, it kind of makes sense looking back, because I've always struggled with sleep and had insomnia and stuff. So the joining up of hearing about it in a lecture and then the job being available, but also thinking, oh yeah, this will be, as someone with insomnia, it's a great job for me.
There's so many people in sort of the entire human factors world who I think fall into this type of thing. One of the best web designers I know is actually legally blind. We seem to focus on maybe the things that we want to fix as much as anything else.
Yeah, I think so. And it helps you sympathise, I think, with your end users if you understand some of the troubles they're going through.
So through the last 18 months or so, we've obviously had this COVID thing. I don't know if you noticed.
Once or twice.
Yeah. Presumably, you had to hit the whole working from home piece. How's that affect you being able to deliver on the day job?
So it's been, weird. I'm sure everyone sympathises with that. So from a work side, we were really busy last year. So one of the things that we help operators with is how to make sure that things are done safely if they have to operate slightly strangely. So early on, when there was all of the repatriation flights and the PPE flights, and airlines couldn't put crew into a hotel in the Far East, they were having to do like put 10 pilots on, fly out to China, load it with PPE and fly straight back. So we did quite a lot of help for operators navigating that and making sure that those crew would have enough rest to be able to operate those flights safely. So we were pretty busy from a business perspective. From a getting used to working like that perspective, yeah, interesting. Once I got my routine sorted, everything was fine. I'm actually in the office today, which is very strange. It's the second time I've been here in 18 months.
Wow, okay.
But so working from home now is just the complete normal. I've got all my setup and everything, but I'd say the first month getting into that new routine and working out what's work and what's not work and separating that time off from the day was a challenge. A couple of minor meltdowns, but we're still here. I think everyone went through the same thing. Great big experiment in everyone work from home.
It certainly has, I guess, pushed up a load of topics. Not only your physical working environment, simple things like desks, monitors. How do I get all of that gear? But also being able to split out. I mean, I certainly know myself struggling with the split between work and home, and I kept on itching, wanting to pick up the laptop, because I'm like, oh, I'm at home. But I can see my desk, so I might as well just go and continue doing a bit of that. And I think it took a few stern words to get me to stop doing that and to actually move the office out of the living room to make it harder. But
and something that, I mean, I'm lucky I have space in my not a very big London flat. It's a London flat, but where I can kind of put the day to rest at the end of the day. But for people I know in the last year whose their office is their bedroom because that's the only place they have, and the link that has, that now this room that your brain should completely associate with sleep is your workplace. The amount of havoc that causes to people trying to get to sleep at night as well has been.
Yes. We still know people working off ironing boards as well, so I feel myself now very privileged to be working the way I am. So I think before we dive back into the risk topic, we'll just take a quick break, and then we'll come right back into it.
You are listening to 1202, the Human Factors Podcast. We wanted to take the opportunity to say thank you for your support. You can help further by rating us through your podcast provider, sharing us through social media, and telling your friends and colleagues. Let's work together in raising awareness of the value in putting users at the center of what we do.
Cool. So to talk more about risk management then, as you alluded to at the beginning, you yourself are a bit of an insomniac, and I'm going through a thing at the moment where I'm kind of struggling to, or have been struggling to do the whole weight loss thing, and my trainer basically turned around and said the first thing you need to do is get your sleep sorted out. You need to be able to sleep more, and you need to have better quality sleep. And I've got to admit, I really struggled with that right at the beginning because, I mean, I've never slept for long. I've never slept, I would say, deeply in the grand scheme of things. But it's also something like you couldn't pick up a book and learn how to do it or anything like that. So where do you start? How do you even work out what it is you need to do?
Yeah, so I know a lot of people do struggle with it. Some people who I'm terribly envious of just go to bed, put their head on the pillow, and they're out like a light. They sleep through till whatever time they want to wake up in the morning, and they jump out of bed, energized, ready for the day. So there's those people who, if you're one of them, great, but I don't entirely like you.
That's my wife, and I'm extremely jealous of her.
Yeah. So envious. For everyone else, I think a lot of it comes back to the routines that we do during the day. So it's recommended that adults over the age of 25 to the age of about 64, 65, we should be getting somewhere between 7 and 9 hours sleep every day, which
Okay.
some people manage, others not so much. So the first thing is about making sure you've got the right amount of time available to sleep. For people who struggle, it can be basically going back to basics. Make sure that time is scheduled. It's important. Just like a meeting is important, just like a workout is important, just like having time to eat a meal, spend time with your friends and family are important. Sleep shouldn't be constrained by all of those things. So we need to treat it just as kind of equally and importantly. So making sure we have that time, we can be in bed for long enough that we can get enough sleep. But we don't want to go too far and spend too much time in bed, because lying in bed awake waiting to fall asleep is a problem. It starts as associating being in bed with being kind of stressed about not falling asleep. So for people who have insomnia, one of the frontline treatments is cognitive behavioral therapy for insomnia. And there's lots of different components to it. It's done by qualified practitioners. But one of the key things that they'll do quite early on is restrict how long you're in bed for, to make sure that basically that entire time in bed is like the people I mentioned earlier on who sleep really well. You're in bed, you're asleep for 85, 90, 95% of the time that you're in bed. And then once you hit that, they'll let you be in bed a bit longer, and then let you be in bed a bit longer until you reach the amount of time you need to be to get all the sleep you need.
Okay.
So that's kind of the number one thing with getting enough sleep, is making sure you're giving yourself the opportunity. And then we can think about the environment. So your bedroom should be dark, the darkest you can possibly make it. Blackout blinds, getting rid of any little electronic lights, all of those things. It should be quiet. Difficult. I live next door to a supermarket which has a delivery every morning at 6 a.m. So
you're getting up at 6 a.m. then?
Completely control the environment, yeah. But I have earplugs, so we can get rid of the noise from that. Temperature-wise, there's a lot that is spoken about kind of room temperature, and it should be between this temperature and this temperature. Right. I can't remember what the numbers are, but it should be comfortable. Cool enough that you're not feeling too hot, but also not too cold that you're feeling cold. If you're someone who likes a big, thick duvet, you probably need the room a bit cooler than somebody who just likes a light blanket, all of those things.
Okay,
so,
yeah.
Temperature, and just comfortable. If you've got an uncomfy mattress, uncomfy pillows, you're not going to sleep well. We spend, in theory, a third of our lives asleep. So we should be investing in things that make us feel comfortable when we're in bed. So they're kind of the main things. Beyond that, what are we doing during the day? Are we getting outside light exercise? Will help set up our body clock. Exercise, people who have a regular routine of exercise tend to sleep better. Sleep is also good for sporting performance, so you get a two-way flow there, which is beneficial on both sides. Are you drinking caffeine late in the day before you're trying to go to bed? Generally sticks around for 5 to 6 hours in your bloodstream, so it can be that person who tells you you don't have to have caffeine after lunch. I'd recommend not doing it. I don't drink coffee, so because I don't like it, not for any kind of other reasons. But I am that annoying person who says, maybe go decaf.
Fair enough.
But there are so many things we can do to address sleep, but keeping it simple, thinking about the time, the environment, and the basic little things that you do during the day is usually where I would start for most people.
So if you're thinking about that basic routine then, and you get that in play, you're obviously then looking at this from a business perspective. Like say, you talk about fatigue risk management. How do you do risk management around fatigue?
Yeah, so it falls into kind of two main areas. So the risk management is all about making sure that there isn't a elevated risk as a risk to the business or an individual as a result of someone's fatigue level. So this comes back to a joint responsibility. So the company is responsible for making sure that say the working pattern isn't horribly fatiguing, that there's enough breaks during the working day and also between working days for people to get rest and get away from the workspace, so get sleep between two consecutive shifts. And then the individual is responsible for using that time appropriately, getting their rest, getting their sleep, and reporting if there is anything that is stopping them from getting their rest, or that they think, hang on a minute, you're scheduling this. It's perfectly legal to schedule this, but actually, as a working pattern, that's not great in reality. So the individual telling the company that, so that the company can take a look and say, yeah, you know what, you're right. Maybe we do need to change how we schedule. So it kind of comes back to that. And then we'll work with organizations looking at working patterns, for example. So think of a large airline that we worked with a couple of years ago in the US, who do a lot of short kind of medium haul flying. So their longest flights would be 4 or 5 hours or so, but they had a lot that were 20, 30 minutes. So everything in that range. And what they found was in the US, obviously quite a big space, and operating across 4 time zones in the mainland US. If they had people who lived and spent most of their time on the West Coast working on the East Coast, they could have taken the really early morning flights down. Quite often they did, because that's just the way that the schedules worked.
Right.
That someone from LA would be in New York and they need to get them back to LA, so they'd take the 5 a.m. New York departure. But for someone who lives in LA, that 5 a.m. departure is 2 a.m., 1 a.m. for their body clock, if I can work out time zones in my head. And then obviously you've got to show up for the flight an hour at least beforehand as flight crew to check in, get prepared, do your briefings. So for them, it was so much earlier than it was for the local East Coast guys. So what that was about was having the conversation with the airline to say, have you got East Coast people who can do these flights? Maybe the West Coast guys can take the 10 a.m. departure instead. And turns out, with a little bit of shuffling by the really clever guys in the scheduling team, they could change these things around. It cost them nothing, just a little bit of thought with the scheduling, and reduce their fatigue overall of their people massively.
So how does that work then? Because obviously, with a lot of organisations, you almost have that principle of, almost a macho thing, isn't there? Saying, I could do this, and I work a lot with the military, and you see this quite a lot of the nothing is the ability to turn around and say, look, I think we could do this a better way is not the same as basically being given the order and saying, yes, of course I'll do that, crack on. So how do you have them conversations? How do you even get around to that point of suggesting it and getting people to be, I guess, open and honest with you about it, rather than just try and battle through because that's what we do?
Yeah, it's a tough one. I mean, the number of conversations, and I think the attitude is going away now a bit in that whole sleep is for the weak, you can sleep when you're dead, all of those kind of comments that used to be around a lot more kind of 10 years or so ago. But it is still difficult because particularly in, as you say, there's quite historically macho environments where it is potentially emitting a sign of weakness or thought of as that. But the way we try and have these conversations is around actually it is really difficult to make these calls sometimes, because it might be that you are putting in a report or answering a survey question to say, this particular flight or this particular duty or this particular working pattern is hard for me from a fatigue perspective. That's a bit easier. But the really difficult calls are I am a pilot, I've got a plane full of people behind me, and actually I'm not safe to take this flight. I'm going to have to say, sorry, we're going to need to find a new crew member. And making that call, that is really hard to do.
Yeah.
And that's what it is at the end of the day. It's not, oh, I'm a bit tired. It's, I am not safe to do this. I am not putting these people at risk. So yeah, that is the call at the end of the day. And it takes guts to make that call.
I was going to say, because I can imagine sort of the difference between, without trying to, I guess, name any airlines, say a small budget airline, is the difference between a large airline who, I guess, invests and does all that sort of stuff. You've got to have a really good understanding or real confidence in your organisation that you can make that call, and that's got to be quite difficult. Which I guess leads you into that thing of whose responsibility is it to manage your own fatigue? Because if I'm tired, if you turn around to me and say, right, you need to go sleeping now in order to be up by then, I know I'm just going to lie there and go, well, I've got to be up in 3 hours, 2 hours, 1 hour, and that type of thing. So whose responsibility is it?
Well, yeah, it's joint, isn't it? Right. So on the day or the night before, you are the only person who can sleep. No one can make you sleep. But also, if you're working a pattern where you have to be up and around at 5 a.m. For those early flights, then we know scientifically, biologically, that it is really difficult for people to fall asleep at 8, 9 in the evening, because we have a little peak in alertness due to our body clock it's usually about 2.5 hours before a normal bedtime.
Okay.
So trying to go to sleep a couple of hours earlier than we normally do, it's really hard, especially on that first day. So you won't be getting as much sleep on that night. Most people manage to get enough to get them through the day, and then maybe you're working another duty the next day. So you're a bit tireder. That can help you to fall asleep a little bit earlier than you normally would on the second night. But these build up across maybe 3, maybe 4 duties. If we're talking about airlines and pilots and cabin crew, in Europe, you could work 5 in a row, but that's for the airline to say, actually, we know that our guys are going to lose maybe an hour, maybe 2 of sleep each night compared to what they'd normally get. Are we okay with them working 5?
Yeah.
Maybe we'll do 3, maybe we'll do 4, because actually, by the 5th day, we don't want to carry that risk. So it comes in kind of both sides. Obviously, you as the individual need to do what you can to get sleep. I mean, if people are out clubbing till 3 and then they're meant to be at work at 5, not a great thing. But if you get to work and realise you haven't had enough sleep to support the day, then that really difficult decision of holding your hand up to say, I'm sorry, guys, I'm not safe. I'm not fit to fly today. And the company should take that as, great, thank you very much. You've made a safety-related decision. Go home, get your rest. Ideally, we'll call you a taxi, because if someone's not safe to fly, they're definitely not safe to drive a car. So
fair point,
put them in a taxi, put them on a train, get them home, that person rests, and then hopefully they're fit and well to come back the next day and carry on the pattern.
And obviously, we're talking, as you said, around that sort of high-risk industries, using air quite a lot. But this can equally apply to, I guess, factory working, kind of with shift working and things like that. So this has a much deeper applicability than just it's not a special thing in many ways. It's actually, we could get so much more out of our staff up and down the piece if we looked at this.
Yeah, absolutely. And so we primarily work in safety critical industries, as I said, but anywhere where you've got shift work, you're going to have problems with sleep. Even non-shift working environments. So there's a group at Washington State University who look at sleep and management. So people in offices and the lack of sleep and the amount of evidence they have on things like the ethics and the decision making that managers make when they haven't slept enough, and the link between short sleep and, they call it cyber loafing. So the days when you should be working on your computer, but instead you're just reading the news or going on whatever other fun websites people go on.
I can't relate to that whatsoever.
Yeah. So you're in the workplace, you're technically present, but you're not doing anything.
Yeah.
And all of this kind of comes back to sleep loss. So for any industry, any employer, any business, it's really relevant. Making sure people have had enough sleep and supporting them to do so.
So how do we then? So if you're an organisation, then you've determined that you've got to understand fatigue, high risk industry. What tools and techniques can you use? What should you be doing as, I guess, best practice to help your employees manage their sleep better?
Yeah, so I think the first step is you've already identified that, they know that they need to do something. That's step one. We know that prescriptive hours of work rules, so whether that is flight time limits for flight crew, whether that's the European Working Time Directive for everyone else, hours of work for train crew, drivers, all of those things, they're not particularly effective at controlling fatigue, unfortunately, but it makes sense. Those rules say, European Working Time Directive says you have to have 11 hours free of work between one working period and the next. If that 11 hours is between 7 in the evening and 6 in the morning, it's a pretty good time to sleep. But by the time someone's driven home, spent some time with their family, had something to eat in the morning, got up, had a shower, driven back to work, then you're really cutting in if someone needs 8 hours of sleep. Most people are somewhere between 7 and 9, but the middle of that is 8. So there's not much time left. If that time is between 7 in the morning and 6 in the evening, body clock says you're not going to get much sleep. And so we need to go beyond these prescriptive hours of work rules to think about actually scientifically, when are people going to get enough sleep? How can we support that sleep? And make sure that people are doing that. So to do that, we need data. And that's the big thing that drives a fatigue risk management system or fatigue risk management approach, is having the data to understand when our people are sleeping, when they're not sleeping, when they're having difficulties, where are the hotspots in our working pattern where we'd expect fatigue to be elevated. Why is fatigue elevated? Is it because it's 3 in the morning?
Okay.
Fatigue's always going to be bad at 3 in the morning. But 3 in the morning on the first night shift versus the second night shift versus the third night shift and so on, they're not all going to look the same. So it's working out the differences. What are people doing at these times? Is it 3 in the morning doing a monitoring task? Okay, do we need to put in something to help them with that? Because we know that people aren't very good at monitoring when they're fatigued. I think Chernobyl and 3 Mile Island, so 2 nuclear incidents, to put them mildly, they both happened at 3, 4, 5, 6 in the morning. Long night shifts. Obviously, there's other factors. There always is with fatigue-related accidents. Usually, it's like the straw that breaks the camel's back. You've got design faults, you've got other things going on, you've got communication breakdown. But then you throw tired people into the mix, they just can't respond as well as they normally would. So we need to think about the data, the evidence that we have, and collecting that from multiple different sources. So you might use a software tool called a fatigue model, which you can put your schedules in, and at the other end it'll say, oh, you've probably got fatigue here, 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 and here. And that is due to the body clock, it's due to people not being predicted to get enough sleep, it's due to, on this particular day, you're going to probably have people being awake for over 20 hours. That's going to be a problem. So you can use these models to give you a kind of general average picture of what the problem might be if you have a planned working schedule. If you don't work to a plan, you can't use one of those.
So presumably that this fatigue model is something that you developed in-house and you use that as a tool as part of your consultancy, or is it something you get from outside?
It's a tool we use, but no, we pay for one. So there's a lot out there. They're generally available. The equations are also available, open source, that some people have published in order to kind of build your own. But they're all based on it's called the 3-process model of sleep. So they take sleep and wakefulness. So generally people can be awake for kind of 18 hours or so before we start to get performance issues.
Right.
And then we sleep. It's like a fuel tank. The longer we're awake for, the emptier our fuel tank gets. We sleep, we fill the fuel tank back up, and we're ready to go the next day. So these models combine the sleep-wake fuel tank with our body clock, which varies in alertness for 24 hours, peaking in the morning, big dip in the night when normally we would be asleep. So it combines those with a third process, which is called sleep inertia, which I'm sure everyone has experienced that groggy feeling when you first wake up, particularly from deep sleep, and for a minute you've got no idea where you are, who you are, what's going on. So that's the third process, which only affects us for about 30 minutes when you first wake up. But if you're an on-call worker, if you are someone who can sleep at work and then might get called to come and do something, sleep inertia is really important for those guys. For everyone else, usually all we're doing in the first 30 minutes after we wake up is making a coffee. So
yes,
we can generally manage that.
I was going to say that's very high on my list. As long as I can get coffee done and not actually speak to anybody for a bit, then that works for me. But, so look at this from a very personal perspective then. I'm a bit of a gadget freak. That I like my gadgets. Is there ways that technology can help us with this? Is there, because there's wearable technologies out there on the market now that or apps on your phone that can apparently do this sleep tracking, and I'm a bit of a data nerd as well, that I love gathering as much data as possible. But what is out there that can actually help us?
Yeah, so I find this wearable tech equally fascinating. I mean, I have a Fitbit, which I've had a Fitbit for years. My current one is mostly, it's got a large enough screen so I can see it when I'm swimming, because I'm terribly short-sighted. I can't see the clock in the swimming pool. That's my main reason to purchase the current Fitbit. But from the sleep side, all of these devices. So there's Fitbits, there's Apple Watches. One I was reading about yesterday is called Whoop, which sounds very fun. That doesn't have a screen on it. It's just a wristband, and then it talks to an app on your phone. They're getting better. So probably if we'd had this conversation even 4 years ago, yes, they're collecting sleep data, but it wasn't great. And the validation against the gold standard, which is polysomnography, or PSG for short, which is where we attach electrodes to people's heads to read what's going on in their brains, to their jawline to get a reading from muscles, and around your eyes to see what your eyes are doing.
That's going to look pretty.
That is the gold standard. It's not very comfortable to wear if you're being studied, but we can pretty much 100% definitely say this person is asleep when they're really asleep, this person is awake when they're really awake, and what stage of sleep they're in, whether that's the deep sleep, whether that's light sleep, or whether it's REM sleep, so when most people do their dreaming. We can tell that from electroding everyone up. The devices now, they're pretty good when it comes to saying you're awake when you definitely are, you're asleep when you definitely are asleep.
Okay.
If you wake up during the night, they're not as good, just because they're mostly based off movement. Some of them use your heart rate as well. So if you wake up in the night and you don't move, how is your watch going to know? Or the thing that's under your mattress, or the phone that you put under your pillow, or I think Google are about to release a thing that sits on the side of your bed and looks at you with radar or something.
Whoa, that's just weird.
I haven't looked into that too much, just because I find it slightly creepy. But yeah, if you don't move, none of those things are going to really work out if you're awake or asleep or not. And then the sleep staging, that's where they're not as good. So knowing if you're in deep sleep or light sleep or dreaming sleep, the data shows us from the studies that have been done to validate these tools, which some have been through, some haven't. They're not quite there yet compared to what we'd do properly with the PSG and wiring people up. But I think eventually they might get there. But for now, if your Fitbit says you didn't get enough deep sleep, I wouldn't worry too much, because it doesn't know a huge amount about your deep sleep yet.
So, but if I'm gathering that sort of data, what can I sort of reflectively do with it? Anything at all, or is it just a case of me? I can, like I do, make my little Excel spreadsheet, and I'm happy with that. But is there things I can reflectively be look using that data for?
I think one of the most useful things that we could all do with these devices is to think about what time we're going to bed and what time we're waking up. So one of the number one things that can help you get good sleep is to go to bed at the same time within kind of 30 minutes every single day, and get up within 30 minutes the same time every single day. So work day, non-working day, holiday, whatever. You go to bed at this time, you wake up at this time, and get up. So a device like anything that tracks your sleep can help you with that. So you'll be able to see, you can set a sleep schedule in most of them.
Yeah.
And it'll say, yeah, you're in bed on schedule. Oh, you're out a bit late last night, or you had a big line or whatever. So you can see through time how well you keep your pattern of sleep. So I think that can be really good. It also helps people get a little bit more awareness of maybe you've got quite a short sleep. So if you are only allowing yourself kind of 6.5 hours of sleep every night, then it's something external that's saying, I'm not sleeping somewhere between 7 and 9 hours. Maybe I need to look at that, in the same way that the step count says you only did 150 steps today.
Yeah.
Maybe you need to do an extra lap around the garden. So from that kind of awareness perspective, I think they're great. It can go too far. So there is a bit of research that's been published showing that people who wearing devices that gave them fake feedback, so the watch said, oh, you didn't sleep very well last night, the quality was low. Asked before they got that feedback, the person might say, yeah, I slept pretty well last night. After they got given the feedback, oh, no, it was a bad night's sleep. The same sleep, but the watch says you didn't sleep very well, so therefore you think you didn't sleep very well. So that can be a problem that we start to, just like with, so many areas, we start to trust the tech over how we actually feel. The other one is if people get too focused on their sleep and too focused on chasing the numbers. So my Fitbit says I should get more than 90%, whatever their sleep score is. And I should be sleeping 8 hours a night because people should sleep for 8 hours a night, all of those things. And we get really het up on that. We can start to put pressure on our sleep. And that's the worst thing we can do, kind of to be anxious about getting to sleep or trying to force sleep. We've all been there. You've got an early morning flight the next day, or you need to get up, or you absolutely can't sleep through your alarm, whatever it is. That's when sleep goes away. So there's I can't remember his name, but there's a psychologist from the early 1900s who said that sleep is like a dove. Like, it will basically sit there so long as you don't try and grab it. That's what it is. You just let it come, you'll sleep fine. If you try and force it, sleep is much further away. And it's the problem. Anyone who struggled to get to sleep will have been there. The best thing we can do is just okay, I'm not falling asleep. Get up, go to a different room, fold some socks, do something really boring. Don't watch TV, ideally. Feel tired, go back to bed.
So is there a risk here with the technology then so we now start to see with wearable technology and say like health insurance companies monitoring how much you've gone to the gym and things like that. Is there a risk of us getting into that bit where we start legislating for people who have to get sleep, pilots, health and safety workers, whatever, having to prove that they've got enough sleep, do you think? Or do you think we're still grown up enough to recognise that we've got to give people the right conditions?
Oh, that's a really good question. There was a review published on this that basically was making that discussion earlier this year by Drew Dawson and his colleagues down in Australia. And I think for a while, the technology is not going to be good enough for us to say, your device says you didn't sleep well enough. But I think they will get there. And then at that point, it's going to come down to, like with all these things, civil liberties and privacy versus the other elements. So there's already a expectation and a responsibility on anyone who does safety critical work to say, I'm not safe to work today, whatever the reason is. It might be sleep, it might be they're not feeling well, It might be psychologically they're not fit to work, or it might be drugs and alcohol. So that requirement is already there. Drivers of cars have been prosecuted for falling asleep at the wheel. So legally, there's already that responsibility. But yeah, whether we start to use tech to prove it, I think it would be fascinating. But yeah, I don't think we're there yet. And I think it might be a bit scary if that does come along.
Yeah, so I guess in many ways it's a watch this space. I'd like to think that that we'd all be very grown up about it and recognise that what we have as human characteristics, but at some point it'll get tested, won't it? Somebody will try and push the boundary, and it's the nature of the way that these things work, I guess, that we'll then find out what people truly think and how people truly feel. So we shall see. Watch this space. Cool. Sarah, this has been an absolutely fascinating insight. I guess everybody should be able to relate to this, I guess, because we all sleep, or at least most of us do. And so just to hear your advice on general sleep and that setting a schedule and things like that is really good. But it's also really interesting to see how that gets put into I guess into a company ethos as well. So that's been absolutely fascinating. Thank you ever so much for your time.
Thank you. It's been great to talk to you.
Thank you for listening to 1202, the Human Factors Podcast. Please do get in touch with your thoughts, questions, and comments. You can contact us at www.barrykirby.co.uk and on Twitter @BAZ_K. See you next time. And remember, it's more than just common sense.
Thank you for listening to 1202, the Human Factors Podcast. Please do get in touch with your thoughts, questions, and comments. You can contact us on social media such as Twitter, LinkedIn, and Facebook at 1202 Podcast. See you next time. And remember, it's more than just common sense.